The radio static crackled through the underground command bunker as Major Natalie Petersen stared at the tactical display showing 500 American soldiers surrounded by enemy forces in the mountains of eastern Syria. Every conventional strategy had failed. Air support was grounded by weather. Artillery was out of range. And in 6 hours, when the storm cleared, enemy reinforcements would arrive to finish what they'd started. The general staff had dismissed her. Unconventional extraction. Plan is too risky and logistically impossible. But as Natalie watched the red dots on her screen, each representing soldiers fighting for their lives, she made a decision that would either save them all or end her military career forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for youth. War room at Forward Operating Base Damascus felt like a tomb. 24 hours earlier, it had buzzed with confident chatter about Operation Mountain Eagle, a routine, sweep and clear mission that was supposed to last 48 hours maximum. Now, the massive digital map dominating the far wall told a different story entirely. Major Natalie Petersen stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed as she studied the tactical situation with the intensity that had made her one of the Army's youngest strategic planners. At 32, she possessed an analytical mind that could process battlefield variables faster than most computers. But tonight that gift felt more like a curse. She could see exactly how bad things had gotten, and exactly why every plan being discussed would fail. We've got Alpha Company pinned down in Grid Square 47 Delta, Colonel Morrison announced, his pointer tracing locations on the illuminated map. Bravo and Charlie companies are scattered across these ridgelines here and here. Enemy forces have established overlapping fields of fire from elevated positions, effectively cutting off any ground-based extraction routes. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Wells, the operations officer, leaned forward in her chair. What about close air support? The weather's supposed to clear by dawn. Negative, Morrison replied grimly. Intelligence reports SA-15 surface-to-air missile systems moved into the area overnight. Even when visibility improves, the air corridor is compromised. We're looking at unacceptable aircraft losses for any meaningful air support. Sarah bit back her response. She'd been tracking enemy movements for weeks through signals intelligence and pattern analysis. The SA-15 deployment wasn't random. It was part of a larger strategy designed to create exactly this scenario. The enemy had deliberately drawn American forces into terrain where conventional extraction methods would be neutralized. It was textbook battlefield shaping, and somehow nobody else in this room seemed to recognize it. General Marcus Thompson, commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division, stood at the head of the conference table like a man bearing the weight of impossible decisions. His weathered face showed every one of his 28 years in uniform, and right now those years felt like a burden rather than an asset. Options? He asked quietly. Major Bradley Harrison, the senior operations planner, cleared his throat. Sir, we could attempt a ground relief force using mechanized infantry, push through the valley approach with armor support, and fight our way to the trapped units. Casualties? Thompson asked. Estimated 20 to 30% losses before we reach them, sir. The terrain favors defensive positions, and enemy anti-tank capabilities are substantial. Sarah watched the general's jaw tighten. 60 to 90 casualties to save 500 seemed like acceptable mathematics until you considered that the relief force would likely become trapped as well, doubling the problem rather than solving it. But pointing that out wouldn't win her any friends in a room where she was already considered an outsider. What about delayed extraction? Asked Colonel Morrison. Wait for reinforcements from the main force. Coordinate a larger operation when we have overwhelming superiority? Lieutenant Colonel Wells shook her head. Timeline doesn't support it, sir. Weather window for helicopter extraction closes again in 18 hours. If we don't get them out during the next clear period, we're looking at a week minimum before conditions allow large-scale air operations. A week was far too long. Natalie had studied the intelligence reports on enemy reinforcements moving toward the area. In 72 hours, what was currently a manageable tactical problem would become a strategic disaster. American forces would be facing a reinforced enemy division with heavy weapons and coordinated command structure. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. "There's another option," Sarah said quietly. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward her, and she could feel the familiar weight of skepticism that seemed to follow her everywhere in the Army's upper echelons. Too young, too unconventional, too willing to challenge established doctrine. The same criticisms that had kept her from receiving the command positions her performance evaluations clearly warranted. "General," Thompson nodded slightly. "Major Chun, let's hear it." Sarah moved to the tactical display, her mind organizing the complex plan she'd been developing while listening to the conventional approaches fail one by one. "The enemy expects us to attempt either air extraction or ground relief through the obvious routes. They've positioned their forces accordingly, concentrated defensive positions, covering the valley approaches and anti-air assets, protecting against helicopter insertion." She used the laser pointer to trace movement patterns on the map. "But there's a third option they haven't prepared for. We don't extract our forces, we expand them." Colonel Morrison frowned. "Expand them?" "Major, our people are surrounded and under fire. How exactly do you propose to reinforce a position that's already compromised?" "By turning the trap into an anvil," Sarah replied, warming to her subject. "The enemy has committed significant forces to maintain the encirclement. Their supply lines are extended, their command structure is distributed across multiple positions, and they're operating under the assumption that time is on their side." She highlighted several positions on the digital map. "If we insert additional forces here, not to extract our trapped-op units, but to establish a larger perimeter, we can reverse the tactical situation. Instead of our people being surrounded, the enemy force becomes the filling in a sandwich." Major Harrison looked skeptical. "That would require inserting forces behind enemy lines, in terrain they control, without air support or artillery preparation. The risk level is enormous." "The risk level of doing nothing is higher," Sarah countered. "Current intelligence shows enemy reinforcements arriving in significant numbers within 72 hours. If we wait, what's currently a battalion-sized problem becomes a division-sized disaster." She pulled up satellite imagery showing movement patterns in the surrounding area. "But if we act now, while enemy forces are committed to maintaining the siege, we can achieve tactical surprise. Small unit insertions using unconventional routes, here through the northern ridge system, here along the eastern watershed. Teams move in light and fast, establish blocking positions, then coordinate a simultaneous breakout from the center while pressure mounts from the outside." General Thompson studied the proposed insertion points with the attention of a man who'd spent decades reading terrain and understanding its tactical implications. Those routes would require night movement through some of the most difficult terrain in the region. Navigation challenges alone could scatter the relief forces across dozens of square kilometers. "Which is why we use the enemy's own positioning against them," Sarah explained. "They've established communications intercept stations and observation posts throughout the area. Instead of avoiding them, we target them systematically. Each position we neutralize becomes a navigation waypoint for follow-on forces. We turn their surveillance network into our roadmap." The room was quiet as the senior officers processed the unconventional approach. Sarah could see the wheels turning behind their eyes, weighing risks against potential benefits, considering the political implications of success versus the career-ending consequences of failure. Lieutenant Colonel Wells was the first to voice the obvious concern. Major, what you're proposing is essentially a night infiltration operation by multiple light infantry elements, operating without direct support in terrain that favors the enemy. The coordination requirements alone are staggering. Ma'am, the coordination requirements for waiting a week while our people get overrun are even more staggering, Sarah replied. And the political consequences of losing 500 American soldiers because we were too cautious to attempt an unconventional rescue are unacceptable. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Walk me through the timeline, Major. How long from insertion to extraction? Sarah had run the numbers dozens of times in her head. Insertion teams move out at 2,200 hours tonight. That gives them 8 hours of darkness to reach their positions and establish blocking positions. At 0600, just as enemy visibility improves, but before they can fully coordinate a response, trapped units begin coordinated breakout along predetermined vectors. Relief teams provide suppressive fire and secure withdrawal routes. Total operation time, 10 hours from start to finish. And if something goes wrong? General Thompson asked quietly. If the insertion teams are detected, if the coordination breaks down, if the enemy responds faster than anticipated. Sarah met his eyes directly. Then we have approximately the same situation we have now, sir, except we've demonstrated initiative instead of accepting defeat. But if everything goes right, we bring home 500 soldiers who would otherwise be listed as casualties or prisoners of war. The silence stretched for nearly a minute as the senior officers considered the proposal. Sarah could see the internal calculations playing out across their faces. Military necessity versus institutional caution. Innovative tactics versus proven doctrine. Career advancement versus moral obligation. Finally, General Thompson spoke. Major Chun, your plan has merit, but it also has substantial risks that could result in significantly higher casualties if execution fails. I'm not prepared to authorize such an operation based on theoretical modeling alone. Sarah felt her heart sink, but she wasn't surprised. The Army's institutional culture favored proven approaches over innovative solutions, especially when those solutions came from officers who hadn't yet earned their stars. Understood, sir. What's the alternative course of action? We wait for weather conditions to improve and attempt conventional helicopter extraction with fighter escort. Acceptable losses, manageable risk, proven methodology. Sir, Sarah said carefully, current weather forecasts show the window for helicopter operations closing again within 18 hours. If that extraction fails due to enemy action or weather deterioration, our people are trapped for a minimum of 1 week. That's a chance we'll have to take, Major. Your proposal, while creative, asks us to commit additional forces to an unproven tactical concept. I won't risk turning a battalion-sized problem into a brigade-sized disaster. As the meeting disbanded and officers filed out to prepare for the conventional extraction attempt, Sarah remained behind, staring at the tactical display that showed 500 American soldiers depending on decisions made by people who would never face the consequences of those decisions personally. She thought about the intelligence reports sitting in her secure files, enemy reinforcement schedules, weapons movement patterns, communications intercepts that painted a picture of coordination and preparation that the conventional wisdom was choosing to ignore. In 72 hours, the tactical situation would deteriorate beyond any hope of successful extraction. The mathematics were clear and undeniable, but mathematics didn't command divisions. Politics did. And Sarah Chun, despite her analytical brilliance and tactical innovation, was still just a major in an institution that valued conformity over creativity, proven doctrine over battlefield adaptation. As she finally left the war room, Sarah made a decision that would either vindicate her strategic thinking or destroy her military career. Sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring the people who were supposed to be making the decisions. The question was whether 500 American soldiers were worth the risk of a court-martial and the end of everything she'd worked for in 12 years of military service. For Sarah Chun, who had joined the army to serve something larger than herself, that wasn't really a question at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The secure communications room in the intelligence wing was supposed to be empty at 2,100 hours. Natalie had counted on that when she used her access codes to enter the facility that housed the most sensitive electronic intelligence gathering equipment at Forward Operating Base, Damascus. What she was about to do would either save 500 lives or end her career in spectacular fashion. Her fingers moved across the encrypted keyboard with practiced efficiency, accessing communication channels that were technically above her authorization level, but within her technical capability. 12 years in military intelligence had taught her that sometimes the difference between success and failure wasn't following proper channels. It was knowing which channels existed in the first place. The first call went to Lieutenant Colonel James Murphy, commanding officer of the 3rd Ranger Battalion, currently stationed at a forward operating base 40 kilometers southwest of the crisis zone. Murphy was an old friend from her days at the Command and General Staff College, one of the few senior officers who respected her strategic thinking, despite her gender and relatively junior rank. Natalie? Murphy's voice crackled through the encrypted connection. What are you doing on this frequency at this hour? Jim, I need a favor, a big one. Sarah pulled up the tactical display she'd been studying for hours, cross-referencing enemy positions with terrain analysis and unit capabilities. How many men can you have ready for immediate deployment within 2 hours? That depends on what kind of deployment we're talking about, and whether this conversation is happening through official channels. Sarah hesitated for only a moment. Once she answered that question, there would be no turning back. It's not official, but it's necessary. A pause on the other end of the line. Murphy had enough experience to understand the implications of what she was saying. How necessary? 500 American soldiers are going to die in the next 18 hours unless someone does something unconventional. And you're that someone? I'm the only one willing to be that someone. Murphy's sigh was audible even through the encrypted connection. Natalie, you know I trust your judgment. You also know that what you're asking could destroy both our careers if it goes wrong. And if we do nothing, 500 families get folded flags instead of their sons and daughters coming home. Sarah brought up the intelligence reports she'd been analyzing, the ones that painted a picture of enemy coordination that the official briefings had glossed over. Jim, I've got signals intelligence showing enemy reinforcements moving into position. Heavy armor, artillery support, anti-aircraft systems. In 72 hours, this goes from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. What do you need? 2 companies of your best people. Light infantry, night operations capable, experienced in unconventional tactics. I need them inserted at grid coordinates I'm about to transmit, and I need them to trust that the person coordinating their operations knows what she's doing. Another pause. Sarah could almost hear Murphy weighing the risks against the potential outcomes. In the Rangers, mission success often required bending regulations, but what she was asking went well beyond bending. Timeline? Movement begins in 90 minutes. I'll have detailed tactical plans transmitted to your operations officer within the hour. Sarah, if this goes sideways, we'll all be too dead to worry about court-martials. The second call was more complicated. Major Rebecca Torres commanded a specialized aviation unit that operated the kind of aircraft designed for missions that didn't officially exist. Stealth-modified helicopters capable of inserting small teams in hostile territory without alerting enemy radar systems. Torres. Rebecca, it's Sarah Chun. I have a theoretical question about your operational capabilities. Theoretical? Tora's voice carried a note of amusement. In my experience, Sarah, your theoretical questions usually involve very real helicopters, doing very dangerous things. How many teams could you insert simultaneously in mountainous terrain, under enemy observation, with zero margin for error? That depends on whether we're talking about a sanctioned operation with proper support, or something that would require me to forget certain conversations ever happened. Natalie closed her eyes. Every person she contacted was being asked to risk their career based on her assessment of a situation that the General Staff had already decided to handle through conventional means, the second option. Then I can give you 3 insertion points, 12 personnel maximum per bird. Approximately 40 minutes of operational time before fuel requirements force return to base. That's enough. Sarah, you know I have to ask, is this coming from upstairs? This is coming from someone who doesn't want to explain to 500 families why their loved ones died because we were too afraid to try something different. The third call was the most dangerous. Captain David Rodriguez commanded a forward artillery battery positioned within range of the operational area. What Sarah had in mind would require precise fire support coordinated with infantry movements across multiple grid squares, the kind of complex operation that demanded split-second timing and absolute trust between units. Rodriguez here. David. It's Major Chun. I need to know your current ammunition status and fire mission capabilities. Sarah, it's past 2,200 hours. Are you calling about an authorized fire mission? I'm calling about a fire mission that could save 500 American lives. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Like the others, he understood the implications of unofficial requests for military support. What kind of fire mission? Coordinated suppression fires, multiple targets, time to support infantry movement through contested terrain. I'll need precision fires on demand, with the ability to shift targets rapidly as the tactical situation develops. How rapidly? 60-second. Response time maximum. Your guns become the orchestra, and I'm conducting the symphony. Jesus, Sarah. What you're describing requires real-time battlefield coordination with multiple moving elements. One miscommunication, and we could end up providing fire support for the wrong side. Sarah pulled up the detailed battle plan she'd been refining for the past 6 hours. David, I've run the calculations 47 times. I know the grid coordinates, the timing sequences, the target priorities. What I need to know is whether you're willing to trust my numbers. How many rounds are we talking about? Everything. You've got. By 2,230 hours, Sarah had assembled an unofficial coalition of military units whose commanders were willing to risk their careers, based on her tactical assessment. 2 companies of Rangers, 3 stealth helicopters, and an artillery battery, all operating without official authorization, coordinating through encrypted channels that bypassed normal command structures, the technical aspects of coordinating. Such an operation were staggering. Natalie found herself building a shadow command structure, using personal relationships and professional respect to create the kind of military cooperation that usually required months of planning and official approval. Instead, she had 2 hours to turn theoretical strategy into operational reality. The first challenge was timing. Each element had to move according to a precise schedule that would bring them into position simultaneously, without any single component alerting enemy forces to the larger operation. Rangers would insert at 3 different locations, establish blocking positions, and wait for coordinated signals before beginning their part of the operation. The second challenge was communication. Operating outside official channels meant relying on alternative communication methods that enemy forces were less likely to monitor. Natalie established a series of coded check-in procedures, using commercial satellite phones and predetermined signal protocols that would allow coordination without revealing the scope of the operation. The third challenge was logistics. Moving military units without official orders required creative interpretation of existing authorizations and careful manipulation of supply chains. Natalie used her intelligence background to identify equipment and transportation assets that could be borrowed without immediate detection. At 2,300 hours, as she finalized the operational orders that would either validate her strategic thinking or destroy her military career, Natalie received an encrypted message from General Thompson's aide-de-camp. "Major Chun, report to the general's office." Immediately, her blood ran cold. Someone had detected her unofficial coordination efforts, and now she would face the consequences before her plan could be implemented. As she walked through the darkened corridors of the command complex, Natalie realized that her choice was no longer between success and failure. It was between court-martial and the deaths of 500 American soldiers. The general's office was dimly lit, with only a desk lamp illuminating the maps and reports scattered across his workspace. Thompson looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Major Chun, I've been reviewing intelligence reports for the past 2 hours. There are several aspects of our current situation that concern me." Natalie maintained her military bearing, but her mind raced through possible responses to what she assumed would be charges of unauthorized use of military communications and coordination of unofficial operations. "Sir, if this is about my activities this evening, ... Thompson raised a hand to stop her. "Major, what this is about is my growing concern that the conventional extraction operation we planned this afternoon has a much lower probability of success than I initially calculated." Natalie blinked, confused by the direction of the conversation. "Furthermore," Thompson continued, "I've received several interesting phone calls from unit commanders, volunteering their services for theoretical tactical exercises that seem remarkably well coordinated for spontaneous offers." The general stood and moved to the tactical display that dominated one wall of his office. "Major Chun, would you care to explain why 3 separate military units have suddenly expressed interest in conducting night training exercises in the exact grid squares where an unconventional extraction operation might be most effective?" Sarah realized that her careful coordination efforts had been detected, but Thompson's tone suggested something other than disciplinary action. "Sir, I took the initiative to explore alternative approaches to our current tactical problem." "Without authorization?" "Yes, sir. Using military assets for operations that haven't been officially approved?" "Yes, sir." Thompson turned to face her directly. "Major, in 30 years of military service, I've learned that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is having subordinates who are willing to take initiative when their superiors are being too cautious." Natalie felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. "Your unconventional extraction plan has merit," Thompson continued. "More importantly, your assessment of enemy reinforcement timelines appears to be accurate. Intelligence confirms significant hostile movement toward our area of operations." He moved to his desk and picked up a folder marked with the highest classification levels. "Major Chun, I'm hereby authorizing Operation Night Symphony, an unconventional extraction mission, using multiple coordinated elements to reverse the tactical situation and extract trapped American forces." Sarah stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Furthermore," Thompson said with the hint of a smile, "I'm placing you in tactical command of the entire operation. Your planning, your coordination, your responsibility." As Natalie left the general's office with official authorization for the operation she'd been planning in secret, she realized that sometimes breaking protocol was exactly what protocol required. The question now was whether her unconventional strategy would work as well in practice as it did in theory. In 6 hours, 500 American soldiers would discover whether their lives depended on mathematical precision or pure luck. At 0200 hours, Major Natalie Petersen stood in the hastily established Tactical Operations Center, surrounded by screens displaying real-time positions of military units, scattered across 50 square kilometers of hostile Syrian terrain. For the first time in her career, she held operational command of a multi-unit combat operation, and the lives of 500 soldiers depended on decisions she would make in the next 8 hours. Night Symphony Control, this is Ranger 16, crackled through her headset. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy's voice was calm despite the fact that his Rangers were currently moving through enemy-controlled territory in complete darkness. First insertion team is 30 minutes out from Objective Alpha. Natalie studied the digital map showing the Rangers' progress toward their first target, an enemy communications relay station positioned on a ridge overlooking the trapped American forces. Copy, Ranger 16. Weather conditions at insertion point? Clear skies, visibility approximately 2 clicks, wind from the southwest at 8 knots. Perfect flying weather for anyone crazy enough to be out here. The first phase of operation. Night Symphony required surgical precision. 3 teams of Rangers would insert simultaneously at different points around the enemy perimeter, each tasked with neutralizing specific targets that formed the backbone of the hostile forces' command and control structure. Communications relays, observation posts, ammunition storage sites, all carefully selected to degrade enemy capabilities without alerting them to the scope of the operation. Ghost Bird. Flight, this is Night Symphony Control, Natalie spoke into her second radio, communicating with Major Torres stealth helicopters. Status report. Night Symphony, Ghost Bird lead. All 3 birds are airborne and proceeding to insertion coordinates. Electronic countermeasures are active, no enemy. Radar contacts detected. We're invisible up here. Natalie felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied complex operations, where every element had to function perfectly. Unlike the theoretical planning sessions she was accustomed to, this was real-time battlefield coordination, where mistakes would be measured in casualties rather than corrected with revised calculations. Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony, she called to Captain Rodriguez's artillery position. Battery status? Night Symphony, Thunder Control, all guns are laid and ready. Fire direction computer is programmed with your target sets. Where? Sitting on 96 rounds of high explosive and ready to make some noise when you give the word. The beauty of Natalie's plan lay in its coordination. Each element would remain invisible until the moment of simultaneous execution. Enemy forces would face attacks from multiple directions at once, overwhelming their ability to respond effectively while creating opportunities for the trapped American units to break out of their encirclement. But coordination was also the plan's greatest vulnerability. If any element was discovered prematurely, if communications were compromised, if timing became desynchronized, the entire operation could collapse into chaos. Ranger 24 to Night Symphony Control, came a new voice. Captain Michael Stevens commanded the 2nd Ranger Team, tasked with neutralizing an enemy ammunition depot that intelligence had identified as critical to sustaining the siege. We have eyes on Objective Bravo. Count 12 hostile personnel, 2 vehicles, significant munitions storage. Natalie pulled up the feed from Stevens' tactical camera, studying the target through his night vision equipment. The depot was larger than intelligence had suggested, with more guards than anticipated. Ranger 24, assessment of target. Difficulty. Manageable, but will need approximately 4 minutes to clear the position completely. That's longer than the original timeline called for. 4 minutes could compromise the entire operation's synchronization. Natalie ran rapid calculations in her head, considering the ripple effects of extending the timeline for one element while maintaining coordination with the others. Ranger 24, can you achieve surprise with a smaller security element? Negative. Guard positioning requires elimination of all sentries before we can access the munitions. Any survivor could alert the main force. Natalie faced her first real-time command decision. Extend the timeline and risk detection, or maintain the schedule and accept incomplete target destruction. Either choice carried consequences that could cascade through the entire operation. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. Timeline adjustment. Hey, hour is now 0630 instead of 0626. All elements acknowledge. The responses came back immediately as unit commanders acknowledged the 4-minute delay and adjusted their own timing accordingly. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction at how smoothly the complex coordination was functioning, then reminded herself that the real test would come when the shooting started. Ghost Bird lead to Night Symphony, Torres reported. First insertion is complete. Ranger team is on the ground and moving toward Objective Alpha. No enemy response detected. 1 down, 2 to go. Natalie watched the tactical display as icons representing Murphy's Rangers moved through the digital terrain toward their target. The communications relay they were approaching controlled enemy coordination for the entire eastern sector of the siege. Its destruction would blind hostile forces to American breakout attempts from that direction. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony. Control, Murphy's voice carried a note of tension. We have a problem. Natalie's stomach dropped. Go ahead, Ranger 1-6. Objective Alpha has been reinforced since our last intelligence update. Count 24 hostile personnel instead of the expected 12. They've also established overlapping security positions that weren't in the original plan. This was worse than a timing adjustment. The Rangers were facing twice the expected resistance in a tactical situation that hadn't been rehearsed. Natalie studied the real-time intelligence feeds, looking for alternatives that could salvage the mission objective without exposing Murphy's team to unacceptable casualties. Ranger 1-6, can you achieve mission success with Thunder Control fire support? Negative. Target is too close to our position for effective artillery fires. We'd be eliminating ourselves along with the objective. Natalie realized she was facing the kind of battlefield decision that separated successful commanders from theoretical strategists. Murphy's team was in position to complete their mission, but only by accepting risks that could result in significant casualties. Aborting their assault would preserve his Rangers, but compromise the overall operation's effectiveness. Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony. Can you provide precision fires on grid square 314 to 628? Night Symphony, Thunder Control. That grid square is within 400 meters of Ranger 1-6's position. Danger close for high explosive munitions. Danger close meant that American forces were within the casualty radius of their own artillery support. It was the kind of calculated risk that required absolute trust between units and precise execution of fire control procedures. Ranger 1-6, are you prepared to accept danger close fires to complete your mission? Murphy's response came without hesitation. Affirmative, Night Symphony. We'll mark our position with infrared strobes and take cover in the ravine 30 meters north of the objective. Give us 2 minutes to get into position. Sarah felt the weight of command as she prepared to order artillery fires that could kill American soldiers if the calculations were wrong by even a few meters. This was why general officers earned their stars through decades of experience rather than academic brilliance. Theoretical knowledge meant nothing when faced with decisions where human lives hung in the balance. Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony. Fire mission, grid 314 to 628. 4 rounds high explosive. Danger close American forces marked by infrared strobes. Confirm target data. Night Symphony, Thunder Control. Confirm grid 314 to 628. 4 rounds here. Danger close friendlies. Ready to fire on your command. Ranger 1-6, confirm your position is marked and secure. Night Symphony, Ranger 1-6. Position marked with IR strobes. Team is in covered positions. Ready for fires. Natalie took a deep breath, knowing that Her next words would either demonstrate the pressure, effectiveness of coordinated operations, or result in a fratricide incident that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Thunder Control, Night Symphony. Fire for effect. The artillery rounds took 18 seconds to travel from Rodriguez's position to the target area. Natalie counted each second while monitoring multiple radio frequencies and watching tactical displays that showed the positions of units scattered across the battlefield. 18 seconds felt like an eternity when American lives depended on the precision of calculations made under pressure. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony. Splash. Good effect on target. Objective Alpha is neutralized. No friendly casualties. Outstanding shooting. Thunder Control. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with professional satisfaction. The coordination had worked exactly as planned, demonstrating that unconventional tactics could achieve results that conventional approaches couldn't match. Ghostbird 2 to Night Symphony, Torres reported. Second insertion is complete. Ranger 2-4 is on the ground and approaching Objective Bravo. Copy, Ghostbird 2. Ranger 2-4, radio check. Night Symphony, Ranger 2-4. We're in position overlooking the ammunition depot. Target appears as briefed, proceeding with assault in 90 seconds. Natalie checked her chronometer. The operation was proceeding according to the adjusted timeline, with 2 of 3 objectives about to be engaged simultaneously. The coordination that had seemed impossible just hours earlier was functioning with the precision of a well-rehearsed military exercise. But the real test would come at an hour, when 500 trapped American soldiers would discover whether Sarah's unconventional strategy could actually extract them from what conventional wisdom had deemed an impossible situation. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. We are now at ATO-15 minutes. Prepare for Phase 2 execution. As Natalie prepared to coordinate the most complex phase of the operation, she realized that everything she had learned about military strategy, tactical planning, and battlefield leadership was about to be tested under conditions where failure would result in consequences she couldn't bear to consider. The Night Symphony was reaching its crescendo, and Natalie Chun was conducting an orchestra of violence that would either validate her belief in unconventional warfare or prove that some situations were truly impossible to solve. At 0630 hours, as the first gray light of dawn painted the Syrian mountains in shades of amber and steel, Major Natalie Petersen initiated the most complex phase of Operation Night Symphony. 500 American soldiers, trapped in defensive positions across 3 separate ridgelines, were about to discover whether months of theoretical planning could translate into battlefield salvation. All Bravo stations, this is Eagle 6. Captain Jessica Martinez's voice crackled across the encrypted channel. Martinez commanded Bravo Company, pinned down for 18 hours in a valley that had become a killing field. We've got movement in the northern sectors. Multiple vehicles. Unknown intentions. Natalie smiled grimly as she monitored the communication. The unknown vehicles were Lieutenant Colonel Murphy's Rangers, moving into their final assault positions after 8 hours of infiltration through hostile territory. But to the trapped soldiers below, they appeared to be additional enemy reinforcements arriving to tighten the noose. Eagle 6, this is Night Symphony Control, Natalie transmitted on the command frequency. Be advised, movement in your northern sector is friendly forces. Prepare for coordinated breakout on my signal. The pause that followed told Natalie everything she needed to know about how desperate the situation had become. Martinez and her soldiers had been fighting for survival against overwhelming odds, and the idea that relief was finally arriving probably seemed too good to be true. Night Symphony Control, Eagle 6. Confirm friendly forces in Sector North. We've had no communication about relief operations. Confirmed, Eagle 6. Relief operations commenced at 020 hours under operational security protocols. Prepare your people for immediate movement when I give the signal. Natalie switched to her second radio, coordinating with the Ranger teams that had spent the night infiltrating enemy positions. Ranger 1-6, status on Objective Charlie? Murphy's response was terse but professional. Night Symphony, Ranger 1-6, Objective Charlie is neutralized. Enemy command post is offline. Senior leadership eliminated. They're operating on squad-level initiatives now, no central coordination. The elimination of the enemy command structure was crucial to Natalie's strategy. Without centralized leadership, hostile forces would be unable to coordinate an effective response to simultaneous breakouts from multiple directions. Each enemy squad would fight independently, allowing American forces to defeat them piecemeal rather than facing organized resistance. Thunder control. This is Night Symphony, Natalie called to Captain Rodriguez's artillery position. Request immediate. Fire mission on grid set Alpha. Suppression fires to cover breakout movement. Night Symphony, Thunder control. Grid set Alpha confirmed. Suppression fires, high explosive, 12 rounds per gun. Ready to fire on your command. Natalie studied the tactical display showing real-time positions of all friendly forces. The coordination required to execute simultaneous breakouts while providing covering fires without hitting. American troops demanded split-second timing and absolute trust between units that had never operated together before. Ghost bird flight. This is Night Symphony control. Status on extraction preparation. Major Torres' voice carried the controlled tension of a pilot preparing for the most dangerous phase of the operation. Night Symphony, Ghost bird lead. All birds are fueled and ready for immediate extraction runs. First pickup zone is prepped, but will need continuous suppression fires to maintain safe approach corridors. The extraction phase would be the most vulnerable moment of the entire operation. Helicopters would be exposed to enemy fire while loading wounded soldiers and essential equipment. If enemy forces manage to coordinate anti-aircraft fires during the extraction, the entire mission could collapse into catastrophe. All stations, this is Night Symphony control, Natalie announced across all frequencies. Phase 2 commences in 60 seconds. Execute breakout on my command. All elements acknowledge. The responses came back in rapid succession as unit commanders confirmed their readiness. 18 hours of siege warfare had prepared the trapped soldiers for coordinated action, and now their survival depended on executing movements they'd rehearsed countless times in training, but never under actual combat conditions. 30 seconds, Natalie announced, watching her chronometer while simultaneously monitoring multiple radio frequencies and tactical displays. All elements stand by. At exactly 0635 hours, Natalie gave the command that would either validate everything she'd learned about military strategy or result in the largest American combat loss in decades. All stations, Night Symphony control. Execute, execute, execute. The Syrian mountains erupted in coordinated violence as artillery rounds screamed overhead. Ranger teams engaged enemy positions from unexpected directions, and 500 American soldiers began fighting their way out of what had seemed like certain death just hours earlier. Eagle 6 to Night Symphony control, Martinez reported, her voice now carrying the steady tone of a professional soldier executing under fire. Bravo. Company is moving. We've got clear lanes to the north and west. Enemy resistance is lighter than expected. Natalie felt a surge of professional satisfaction. The psychological effect of simultaneous attacks from multiple directions was working exactly as she'd predicted. Enemy forces, suddenly facing threats from positions they'd considered secure, were falling back to defensive positions instead of maintaining their stranglehold on the trapped Americans. Charlie 7 to Night Symphony, came another voice. Major Robert Kim commanded Charlie Company, positioned on the eastern ridgeline where enemy forces had concentrated their heaviest weapons. We're taking effective fire from armor positions. Request immediate artillery support on grid 445 to 332. Natalie checked the grid coordinates against her master target list. Kim's request would require danger close fires with his own troops within the casualty radius of high explosive artillery rounds. It was exactly the kind of calculated risk that separated successful military operations from academic exercises. Thunder Control, Night Symphony. Fire Mission Grid 445 to 332. 4 rounds high explosive, danger close American forces. Charlie 7 will mark position with colored smoke. Night Symphony, Thunder Control. Danger close fires confirmed. Ready to fire when friendlies are marked. And secure. Charlie 7, mark your position and take cover. Artillery inbound in 90 seconds. The coordination required to manage multiple simultaneous combat actions while preventing fratricide between friendly forces pushed Natalie's analytical capabilities to their limits. She found herself processing battlefield information faster than she'd ever imagined possible, making life and death decisions based on fragmentary reports and tactical instincts developed through years of theoretical study. Ranger 24 to Night Symphony, Captain Stevens reported from his position overlooking the ammunition depot. Enemy forces are attempting to consolidate at the southern supply depot. We can interdict, but we'll need extraction support if we engage. Natalie realized that Stevens had identified a critical decision point. Enemy forces were attempting to regroup at their supply depot, potentially creating a strong point that could threaten the entire extraction operation. Eliminating the depot would prevent enemy reorganization, but would also expose Stevens' Rangers to counterattack. Ranger 24, assess enemy strength at the depot. Night Symphony, approximately 30 personnel with light armor support. Manageable. Target if we can achieve surprise. Thunder Control, can you provide immediate fires on the southern depot if required? Affirmative, Night Symphony. We've got pre-plotted fires on that position, ready to shoot on 30 seconds notice. The tactical solution was elegant in its simplicity. Stevens would initiate his assault on the depot, drawing enemy attention and forcing them to expose themselves to artillery fires. The combined effect would eliminate the last organized enemy resistance while creating clear withdrawal routes for the extracting American forces. Ranger 24, initiate assault on the depot. Thunder Control, stand by for immediate fire support. As Stevens' Rangers engaged the enemy supply depot, Natalie monitored the larger tactical picture through her digital displays. The simultaneous breakouts were proceeding according to plan, with American forces creating expanding security perimeters around their extraction zones, while enemy resistance fragmented into isolated pockets. Ghostbird lead to Night Symphony. Torres reported, first extraction run is commencing. We've got wounded personnel ready for immediate evacuation. The medical evacuation phase represented both the humanitarian imperative driving the entire operation and its greatest tactical vulnerability. Helicopters loaded with wounded soldiers would be unable to maneuver defensively, making them priority targets for any enemy forces that maintained operational anti-aircraft capabilities. Thunder Control, establish continuous suppression fires around landing zone Alpha. Keep those birds safe. Night Symphony, Thunder Control, continuous fires commencing now. Any enemy position that shows anti-aircraft activity gets immediate attention. Natalie watched through her tactical cameras as the first evacuation helicopter touched down in a cleared area that had been under enemy observation just hours earlier. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, loading wounded personnel while maintaining defensive perimeters against potential counterattacks. Ghostbird lead, Night Symphony. First bird is clear, no enemy interference detected. Copy, Night Symphony. Proceeding to landing zone Bravo for second pickup. The success of the first extraction run demonstrated that Natalie's strategy was working. Enemy forces fragmented by simultaneous attacks and deprived of central coordination were unable to mass fires against the vulnerable helicopters. What had seemed impossible just 18 hours earlier was becoming a textbook example of how unconventional tactics could overcome conventional limitations. Eagle 6 to Night Symphony, Martinez reported. Bravo Company has reached the primary extraction zone. We've got 17 wounded, including 3 urgent surgical cases. Copy, Eagle 6. Ghostbird 2 is inbound to your position. Prepare for immediate extraction of urgent cases first. As the second phase of extractions commenced, Natalie realized that Operation Night Symphony was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections. Not only were American forces successfully breaking out of their encirclement, but they were doing so with minimal additional casualties while maintaining unit cohesion and equipment recovery. Charlie 7 to Night Symphony. Major Kim reported. Eastern Ridge is secure. Enemy forces have withdrawn to positions beyond effective range. We're ready for extraction when birds are available. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony, Murphy added. Northern sector is clear. All Ranger objectives have been accomplished. 0 friendly casualties. Outstanding work coordinating this operation. Natalie felt a moment of professional pride mixed with profound relief. The complex coordination that had seemed nearly impossible in the planning stages had functioned with precision under actual combat conditions. More importantly, 500 American soldiers who had faced certain death or capture were now moving toward safety. But the operation wasn't complete yet. The final phase would require extracting the Ranger teams and artillery support elements while maintaining defensive coverage against potential enemy counterattacks, until the last American soldier was safely out of hostile territory. Operation Night Symphony remained vulnerable to catastrophic reversal. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control, Natalie announced. Phase 2 is proceeding according to plan. Prepare for Phase 3 extraction. Sequence, we're bringing everyone home. As dawn broke fully over the Syrian mountains, Major Natalie Petersen realized that she was conducting the most successful unconventional military operation of her career. The question now was whether she could maintain the complex coordination required to complete the mission without losses that would overshadow its tactical success. At 0742 hours. Just as Major Natalie Petersen began to believe that Operation Night Symphony would conclude without major complications, the Syrian mountains exploded with the distinctive thunder of incoming ballistic missiles. Incoming, incoming, screamed across multiple radio frequencies as Katyusha rockets began impacting around the extraction zones. The first salvo struck landing zone Bravo just as Ghostbird 2 was lifting off with a full load of wounded soldiers. Ghostbird 2 is taking fire, Major Torres reported, her voice tight with the controlled panic of a pilot under attack. Multiple missile impacts around the LZ. Bird 2 has sustained damage, attempting emergency landing. Natalie watched in horror through her tactical feed as the damaged helicopter autoritated toward an improvised landing zone, smoke trailing from its engine compartment. 23 wounded soldiers and a 4-person aircrew were about to become stranded in hostile territory, and the rocket attack indicated that enemy forces had repositioned heavy weapons despite the successful Ranger interdiction missions. Thunder. Control, this is Night Symphony. Immediate counter-battery fire. Find those rocket launchers and eliminate them. Night Symphony, Thunder Control. We're tracking rocket signatures from multiple positions. Appears to be truck-mounted systems, highly mobile. We'll need target acquisition support to engage effectively. The tactical situation had deteriorated from controlled extraction to emergency rescue in less than 30 seconds. Enemy forces, rather than retreating as intelligence had predicted, had repositioned their heavy weapons and were now targeting the most vulnerable element of the operation, helicopters loaded with wounded personnel. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony, Murphy's voice carried the urgency of a professional soldier adapting to changing circumstances. "We can provide target acquisition for counter-battery fires, but we'll need to move from our current positions. That exposes us to enemy observation." Natalie faced the kind of cascading crisis that separated successful commanders from those who collapsed under pressure. The rocket attack had created multiple simultaneous problems: a downed helicopter with wounded personnel, ongoing missile fire threatening remaining extraction aircraft, and the need to expose Ranger teams to enemy fire in order to locate and eliminate the rocket launchers. "All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. Priority mission is now combat search and rescue for Ghostbird 2. All other operations are secondary to recovering that aircrew and passengers." Eagle 6 to Night Symphony. Captain Martinez reported from her position near the crashed helicopter. "We've got eyes on Ghostbird 2. Bird is down but intact, no secondary explosions. We can see movement around the aircraft. Appears survivors are establishing defensive perimeter." Ghostbird lead to Night Symphony, Torres added. "I'm orbiting at safe distance. Can provide close air support if we can identify target locations. But I need those rocket positions eliminated before attempting another landing." Natalie realized that the enemy had deliberately allowed the initial extractions to succeed in order to create a more valuable target, a downed helicopter full of wounded American soldiers. It was a tactically sophisticated ambush that demonstrated far more coordination than intelligence assessments had indicated. Ranger 2-4 to Night Symphony. Captain Stevens reported from his position overlooking the former enemy supply depot. "We've identified at least 3 rocket launcher positions. Mobile systems moving between prepared firing points. They're using the depot area as a staging ground. Can you engage the rocket launchers directly?" "Negative, Night Symphony. There. Hull down behind defensive positions, only exposed during firing sequences. We'd need to get closer, but that would put us in the open during movement." The tactical mathematics were brutal. Eliminating the rocket launchers required exposing Ranger teams to enemy fire. Leaving the launchers operational meant that remaining helicopters couldn't safely approach to extract the downed aircrew. Every option carried significant risks of American casualties. "Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony. Can you provide smoke screens to cover Ranger movement toward the rocket positions?" "Affirmative, Night Symphony. We can lay white phosphorus smoke along grid lines 440 through 448. That should provide concealment for infantry movement, but duration is limited to approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes for Rangers to move across open ground, locate mobile rocket launchers, and eliminate them before the concealment dissipated." It was the kind of mission that required perfect execution under combat conditions, with no margin for error or equipment failure. Ranger 1-6, Ranger 2-4, this is Night Symphony. Prepare for coordinated assault on rocket positions under smoke cover. Timeline is 8 minutes from smoke deployment to target elimination." "Roger, Night Symphony," Murphy responded. Both teams acknowledge. "We'll coordinate movement from 2 directions, eliminate the launchers, then establish overwatch for helicopter recovery operations." As Thunder Control began laying smoke screens across the valley floor, Natalie coordinated the most complex tactical operation of her career. Multiple Ranger teams moving through hostile territory, artillery providing both concealment and suppressive fires, helicopter pilots standing by for immediate rescue operations, and over 500 American soldiers, depending on decisions she was making in real time. "Smoke is good," Stevens reported as white phosphorus rounds created a dense chemical fog across the target area. "Both Ranger teams are moving. Estimate 6 minutes to reach assault positions." "Ghostbird lead to Night Symphony," Torres called. "I've got reports of additional enemy movement from the east. Appears to be reinforcements moving toward the crash site. Timeline is critical. If they reach Ghost Bird 2 before we extract the survivors, this becomes a prolonged firefight. Natalie checked her tactical displays, analyzing the convergence of enemy reinforcements and friendly recovery operations. The mathematical precision that had characterized the early phases of Operation Night Symphony was giving way to the chaotic improvisation that defined urban warfare under pressure. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. Enemy reinforcements are approaching from the east. Eagle 6, can you intercept and delay those forces? Affirmative, Night Symphony, Martinez replied. Bravo Company is moving to establish blocking positions. We can hold them for approximately 15 minutes, but we'll need fire support if they have armor. Thunder Control, stand by to provide immediate fires in support of Bravo Company. Priority. Targets are any armored vehicles in the eastern approach routes. The coordination required to manage simultaneous combat actions across multiple grid squares while preventing fratricide between friendly forces pushed military communication systems to their limits. Natalie found herself orchestrating a three-dimensional chess game where every move had life and death consequences. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony, Murphy reported. First rocket launcher is neutralized. Moving towards second position, but we're taking effective small arms fire. Enemy has infantry supporting the launchers. Ranger 2-4 to Night Symphony, Stevens added. Second launcher is in sight, but they're repositioning. Looks like they're trying to move closer to the crash site. The enemy was adapting their tactics in real time, using the mobile rocket launchers to threaten both extraction helicopters and the downed aircrew. It was exactly the kind of tactical flexibility that made modern warfare so different from the predictable scenarios taught in military academies. Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony. Immediate fire mission on mobile targets. Ranger teams will mark targets with colored smoke. Danger close fires authorized. Night Symphony, Thunder Control. Ready for immediate fires on marked targets. Ranger teams acknowledge danger close procedures. Ranger 1-6 acknowledges danger close. Marking target with red smoke, taking cover. Ranger 2-4 acknowledges. Yellow smoke on target. Team is secure. Natalie watched through her tactical displays as artillery rounds began impacting around the marked targets. The precision required to eliminate enemy positions without hitting. American forces demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated operations. But it also highlighted how quickly successful missions could deteriorate into desperate firefights. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony. Splash, good effect on target. Second rocket launcher is neutralized, no friendly casualties. Ranger 2-4 to Night Symphony. Target destroyed. Third launcher is attempting to reposition toward the crash site, but we've got clear fields of fire now. Outstanding work. Ghost Bird lead, can you begin approach to crash site? Night Symphony, Ghost Bird lead, beginning approach now. I'll need continuous overwatch during landing and loading operations. As Major Torres' helicopter began its approach to the crash site, Natalie realized that Operation Night Symphony had evolved from a planned extraction into something much more complex, a running battle that tested every aspect of her tactical training and leadership abilities. Eagle 6 to Night Symphony, Martinez reported. Eastern reinforcements are engaged. We're holding our positions, but they've got more armor than expected. Looks like someone upgraded their assessment of this operation's importance. Copy. Eagle 6, Thunder Control, priority fires on eastern approach. Everything you've got. Night Symphony, Thunder Control. Firing for effect on eastern grid squares. We're approaching minimum ammunition levels. Recommend expediting remaining extractions. The artillery warning highlighted another developing crisis. Extended combat operations were consuming ammunition faster than planned, and remaining extraction operations would have to proceed with reduced fire support. Every minute of delay increased the risk that friendly forces would exhaust their offensive. Capabilities before completing the mission. Ghost bird lead to night Symphony, Torres reported. On the ground at crash site. Loading wounded and aircrew now. Estimate 4 minutes for complete loading. 4 minutes with a stationary helicopter under potential enemy observation felt like an eternity. Natalie monitored multiple radio frequencies while calculating ammunition expenditures and tracking enemy movement patterns, trying to maintain tactical awareness of a battle that was happening across 50 square kilometers of mountainous terrain. All ranger stations provide overwatch for Ghost Bird lead. Priority is protecting that helicopter until extraction is complete. Ranger 16 acknowledges. We've got good fields of fire covering the landing zone. Ranger 24 acknowledges. Northern approach is secure. As the rescue helicopter struggled to lift off with its maximum load of wounded personnel, Natalie realized that the success or failure of Operation Night Symphony would be determined by events happening right now. In these critical minutes when American lives hung in the balance between tactical planning and battlefield, reality. At 0758 hours, as Ghost Bird lead struggled skyward with its precious cargo of wounded soldiers, Major Natalie Petersen faced the harsh reality that successful military operations often demanded sacrifices that textbooks never adequately prepared commanders to make. Night Symphony Control, this is Ghost Bird lead. Major Torres transmitted, her voice strained with the effort of piloting an overloaded helicopter under combat conditions. We're airborne, but Bird is severely degraded. Hydraulic pressure is dropping. Engine temperature is climbing. I don't think we can make it back to base. Natalie's tactical display showed the damaged helicopter limping eastward, gradually losing altitude as its damaged systems failed under the stress of combat. Operations. 27 wounded American soldiers were aboard an aircraft that might not survive the flight to safety. Ghost Bird lead, what's your assessment for emergency landing options? Night Symphony, I've got maybe 10 minutes of flight time before. Systems failure forces an auto-rotation. There's a clearing about 8 clicks northeast of current position. Grid 523 to 441. It's the best option, but it's still in potentially hostile territory. Another emergency landing would create another rescue mission, stretching already depleted resources even thinner. But Natalie realized this was exactly the kind of cascading crisis that separated theoretical planning from battlefield reality. Military operations never concluded according to neat timelines or academic projections. Thunder Control, this is Night Symphony. What's your ammunition status? Captain Rodriguez's response was grimly professional. Night Symphony, we're down to 18 rounds high explosive. No white phosphorus remaining. Recommend conserving fires for absolute emergencies. Only 18 artillery rounds to support potential rescue operations for a second downed helicopter, while simultaneously covering the extraction of remaining forces and ranger teams. The mathematical precision that had characterized the early phases of Operation Night Symphony was giving way to resource management decisions that would determine whether tactical success translated into strategic victory. Eagle 6 to Night Symphony. Captain Martinez reported from her blocking position against enemy reinforcements. Eastern forces have been neutralized, but we've got movement from the south now. Appears to be a different unit, better equipped. They're moving with purpose toward our positions. Natalie studied intelligence reports flowing through her secure terminals. The enemy response was more sophisticated than initial assessments had predicted, suggesting that Operation Night Symphony had attracted attention from higher-level command elements. What had begun as a tactical rescue mission was evolving into a strategic engagement with implications beyond the immediate battlefield. Ranger 16 to Night Symphony, Murphy reported. We've completed our mission objectives, but we're getting reports of significant enemy movement throughout the area. Looks like they're bringing in reinforcements from multiple directions. Recommend expediting final extractions. The window for clean extraction was rapidly closing. Enemy forces, initially caught off guard by the unconventional approach, were now responding with the kind of coordinated deployment that indicated serious tactical reassessment. Natalie faced the possibility that her successful rescue operation might trap even more American forces in an escalating engagement. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. Priority mission is now rapid extraction of all remaining personnel. Ghostbird 3, what's your status for emergency pickup operations? Night Symphony, Ghostbird 3, I'm ready for immediate pickup, but Ghostbird lead situation changes our timeline. If I have to provide search and rescue for a second bird, that extends everyone's exposure time significantly. Natalie realized she was facing the commander's worst nightmare, the choice between abandoning wounded soldiers or risking additional forces in increasingly dangerous rescue attempts. Every decision carried consequences that would ripple through the entire operation and potentially cost lives regardless of what she chose. Ghostbird lead, can you maintain flight long enough to reach the emergency landing zone? Night Symphony, I'll make it work. But once I'm on the ground, I'm staying there until someone comes to get us. This bird won't fly again without major repairs. As Torres' damaged helicopter continued its precarious flight toward the emergency landing zone, Natalie coordinated the most complex phase of an operation that had already exceeded every parameter of its original planning. Multiple simultaneous extractions, emergency rescue operations, and defensive actions against reinforcing enemy units, all with diminishing ammunition supplies and increasing enemy pressure. Charlie 7 to Night Symphony, Major Kim reported. From the Eastern Ridge position, we're ready for extraction, but we've identified what appears to be enemy artillery moving into range of the operational area. If they get those guns positioned, our extraction zones become untenable. Enemy artillery would fundamentally change the tactical equation. Helicopter landing zones that were currently manageable under small arms fire would become death traps under coordinated artillery bombardment. Natalie had perhaps 15 minutes to complete all extractions before enemy fire support made rescue operations impossible. Thunder Control, can you engage enemy artillery with counter-battery fires? Night Symphony, with current ammunition levels, I can engage one battery effectively. If there are multiple gun positions, we'll have to prioritize targets. Ranger 2-4 to Night Symphony, Captain Stevens reported. We've got eyes on enemy artillery positions. Count 6 self-propelled guns, appears to be 152 mm systems. They're setting up in defilade positions about 12 clicks south of the operational area. 6 enemy artillery pieces against 18 remaining American artillery rounds. The mathematics were stark and unforgiving. Natalie could suppress enemy fires long enough to complete some extractions, but not all of them. Someone would be left behind to face overwhelming odds. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control. We are implementing emergency extraction priorities. Wounded personnel and essential equipment first, then combat effective units in order of tactical importance. The decision felt like a betrayal of everything the military taught about leaving no one behind. But Natalie understood that sometimes leadership meant making choices that preserved the maximum number of lives, even when those choices violated emotional preferences. Ghostbird 3 to Night Symphony, came the call from the remaining operational helicopter. I'm inbound to Charlie 7's position. Estimate 5 minutes to landing zone. Ghostbird lead to Night Symphony, Torres reported simultaneously. Emergency landing complete. All passengers and crew are secure. Establishing defensive perimeter. We'll need pickup when resources are available. 27 more soldiers requiring rescue in a location that would demand another high-risk helicopter mission. Natalie felt the weight of command as she balanced the lives of soldiers already extracted against those still requiring rescue. while enemy artillery prepared to make all rescue operations exponentially more dangerous. Thunder control. This is Night Symphony. Initiate counter-battery fires on enemy artillery positions. Grid coordinates follow. Night Symphony Thunder control. Firing for effect on enemy guns. This expends our remaining ammunition for anything except direct defense. The artillery duel that followed would determine whether Operation Night Symphony concluded as a tactical success or evolved into a strategic disaster. American guns firing with precision born of professional expertise and desperate necessity. Engaged enemy artillery systems that threatened to turn rescue operations into mass casualty events. Thunder control to Night Symphony. Good hits on enemy battery. Estimate 4 guns neutralized, 2 still operational. Recommend immediate extraction operations before they can coordinate effective fires. 4 enemy guns eliminated, 2 remaining. Not perfect, but sufficient to create a window for final extraction operations. Natalie coordinated helicopter movements while monitoring enemy response patterns and calculating ammunition expenditures down to individual rounds. Ghost Bird 3 to Night Symphony, the pilot reported from Charlie 7's position. Loading complete, lifting off now. Charlie Company is extracted. Copy, Ghost Bird 3. Proceed to emergency landing zone for pickup of Ghost Bird leads. Passengers. Ranger 1-6 to Night Symphony, Murphy called. We're ready for extraction, but I recommend maintaining Ranger 2-4 in overwatch positions until all aircraft are clear of the operational area. Murphy's tactical assessment was sound. Ranger teams provided the defensive umbrella that allowed helicopter operations to proceed safely. Extracting them prematurely would expose remaining aircraft to enemy action, but leaving them too long risked trapping elite soldiers in deteriorating tactical situations. Acknowledged, Ranger 1-6. Maintain positions until all helicopters are clear, then prepare for final extraction. As Ghost Bird 3 approached the emergency landing zone where Torres had set down her damaged aircraft, Natalie realized that Operation Night Symphony was approaching its conclusion through a combination of tactical innovation, professional competence, and calculated risks that had pushed every participant beyond their normal operational limits. Ghost Bird 3 to Night Symphony. Loading survivors from Ghost Bird lead. Aircraft is severely damaged, but crew reports all essential. Equipment recovered. Copy, Ghost Bird 3. What's your assessment for final extraction runs? Night Symphony. I can make one more round trip before fuel requirements force return to base. After that, remaining personnel will need alternative extraction methods. 1. More helicopter run. Enough to extract either the remaining Rangers or the soldiers at one of the secondary positions, but not both. Natalie faced the final command decision of Operation Night Symphony, which American forces would be extracted immediately, and which would have to wait for follow-on operations that might not be possible if enemy reinforcements continued arriving. Ranger 1-6, Ranger 2-4, this is Night Symphony Control. Final extraction priority goes to Ranger 1-6's team. Ranger 2-4 will maintain overwatch until alternative extraction can be arranged. Night Symphony, Ranger 2-4 acknowledges. We'll hold our positions and provide security for any follow-on operations. Stephen's acceptance of extended deployment demonstrated the professionalism that made Special Operations Forces effective in impossible situations. But Natalie knew that alternative extraction might mean days or weeks of hiding in hostile territory while conventional forces organized relief operations. Ghost Bird 3 to Night Symphony came the final extraction. Report. Ranger 1-6 is aboard. Departing operational area now. All priority personnel have been recovered. As the last helicopter disappeared over the eastern ridgeline, carrying Lieutenant Colonel Murphy and his Rangers toward safety, Natalie conducted a final assessment of Operation Night Symphony's outcomes. 500 American soldiers extracted from certain death or capture. Elite Ranger teams successfully infiltrated and eliminated key enemy targets. Coordinated artillery and aviation support that demonstrated the effectiveness of joint operations. But Captain Stevens and his Rangers remained in hostile territory, dependent on uncertain future operations for their own extraction. Major Torres would require extensive aircraft repairs before returning to operational status. And enemy forces throughout the region now understood that American military capabilities included unconventional operations that could achieve results conventional wisdom deemed impossible. All stations, this is Night Symphony Control, Natalie announced across the command network. Primary mission objectives have been achieved. 500 American personnel have been successfully extracted from hostile territory. Secondary operations for remaining personnel will be coordinated through follow-on missions. As she began drafting the after-action reports that would document every aspect of Operation Night Symphony for military analysis and historical record, Major Natalie Petersen realized that successful leadership often meant accepting imperfect victories as the best outcomes possible under circumstances that offered no perfect solutions. The Night Symphony had concluded, but its echoes would influence military doctrine and tactical innovation for years to come. More importantly, 500 American families would not receive folded flags because one major had been willing to risk her career on mathematical calculations and unconventional thinking. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The secure conference room on the Pentagon's 4th floor buzzed with an energy that Major Natalie Petersen had never experienced before. 3 days after Operation Night Symphony's conclusion, she found herself sitting across from some of the most senior military officials in the United States, watching as her unconventional rescue mission became the subject of intense strategic analysis. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, studied the digital presentation displaying Night Symphony's tactical timeline with the focused attention of someone who understood that this briefing would influence American military doctrine for the next decade. At 57, Hayes had earned her position through a combination of strategic brilliance and political acumen that made her one of the most respected military leaders of her generation. Major Petersen, Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority that came with commanding respect from both civilian leadership and military professionals. Your operation achieved objectives that conventional planning deemed impossible. But it also violated established protocols, bypassed command authority, and exposed American forces to risks that could have resulted in catastrophic losses. Natalie maintained her military bearing while internally processing the implications of the chairman's opening statement. Operation Night Symphony had succeeded beyond all expectations, but success didn't automatically translate into vindication when that success came through unauthorized actions that challenged institutional hierarchy. Ma'am, the tactical situation required immediate action that conventional approaches couldn't provide. Waiting for official authorization would have resulted in the loss of 500 American personnel. That assessment assumes your unconventional approach was the only viable option, interjected General Marcus Thompson, who had flown to Washington specifically for this briefing. Military doctrine exists because it provides proven frameworks for complex operations. Individual initiative, however well-intentioned, cannot substitute for institutional wisdom developed over decades of experience. Natalie felt the familiar frustration of trying to explain innovative thinking to minds shaped by traditional approaches. But she also understood that Thompson's concerns reflected legitimate institutional priorities that extended beyond any single operation, regardless of its tactical success. Sir, with respect, institutional wisdom assumes that future conflicts will resemble past conflicts. The enemy coordination we encountered in Syria demonstrated tactical sophistication that conventional doctrine hadn't anticipated. They deliberately created conditions where proven approaches would fail. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the Pentagon's chief strategic analyst, leaned forward with the intensity of someone who spent her career studying the intersection of tactics and technology. Major, walk us through your decision-making process when you chose to coordinate unofficial operations with multiple unit commanders. What convinced you that bypassing command authority was justified? The question struck at the heart of military discipline and the tension between individual initiative and institutional control. Natalie realized that her answer would determine not only her own career trajectory, but potentially influence how the military balanced innovation against established procedures. Ma'am, the mathematics were undeniable. Intelligence showed enemy reinforcements arriving within 72 hours that would transform a manageable tactical problem into a strategic disaster. Conventional extraction methods required weather windows that weren't available within the required timeline. The choice was between unauthorized action that could save 500 lives or authorized inaction that would certainly cost 500 lives. But unauthorized action could have cost significantly more lives if your calculations were wrong, Hayes pointed out. Military command structure exists precisely to prevent individual officers from making strategic decisions based on incomplete information or personal assessment. Natalie understood the institutional perspective, but she also remembered the tactical display showing 500 red dots, representing soldiers who were depending on someone making the right decision, regardless of who had the authority to make it. Ma'am, respectfully, my calculations weren't based on incomplete information. They were based on intelligence analysis that painted a clear picture of enemy capabilities and intentions. The institutional assessment chose to disregard that intelligence in favor of conventional approaches that the enemy had specifically prepared to counter. General Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. Major Petersen, your intelligence analysis has been reviewed by our most senior analysts. Your assessment of enemy intentions was accurate. Your projection of reinforcement timelines was correct. Your tactical coordination achieved results that exceeded optimistic projections. Natalie felt a moment of cautious optimism, but Hayes' tone suggested that vindication might come with consequences she hadn't anticipated. However, Hayes continued, the precedent you've established raises fundamental questions about military discipline and command authority. If every major feels authorized to initiate unauthorized operations based on personal tactical assessment, military effectiveness becomes dependent on individual judgment rather than institutional coordination. The critique highlighted the central tension in modern military operations, the need for rapid tactical adaptation versus the requirement for coordinated strategic planning. Natalie realized that her success had created an institutional dilemma that extended far beyond her individual case. Ma'am, I understand the institutional concerns, but I also believe that rigid adherence to established procedures can prevent adaptation to rapidly changing tactical situations. The enemy won't wait for official authorization before implementing innovative approaches. Colonel Mitchell pulled up intelligence reports that had been classified above Natalie's clearance level until this briefing. Major, what you don't know is that your operation has already influenced enemy tactical development. Intelligence indicates that hostile forces are now incorporating countermeasures specifically designed to prevent similar unconventional rescue operations. The revelation added another dimension to the strategic implications of Night Symphony's success. Tactical innovation that worked once might not work again, especially when that innovation had been successful enough to attract enemy attention. And adaptation. Which brings us to the central question, Hayes said, her tone shifting to something approaching professional respect. How do we incorporate the lessons of Operation Night Symphony into institutional doctrine without encouraging every field commander to bypass established authority when they disagree with official decisions? Natalie realized that the briefing had evolved from potential disciplinary action into strategic planning discussion. Her unauthorized operation had succeeded well enough to force senior leadership to grapple with fundamental questions about military innovation and institutional adaptation. Ma'am, I believe the answer lies in creating institutional frameworks that encourage tactical innovation while maintaining strategic coordination. Field commanders need authorization to adapt to rapidly changing situations, but that authorization should come with clear parameters and accountability measures. Explain, Hayes said simply. Establish tactical innovation protocols that allow field commanders to implement unconventional approaches when specific criteria are met. Time-sensitive situations where conventional approaches are inadequate, clear. Intelligence supporting alternative tactics, and coordination with adjacent units to prevent conflicting operations. Create institutional mechanisms for rapid approval of innovative approaches rather than forcing commanders to choose between unauthorized action and tactical failure. General Thompson looked skeptical. Major, what you're describing is institutional authorization for the kind of unauthorized action that brought us here in the first place. How do we maintain command discipline if every officer believes they're authorized to reinterpret orders based on their personal tactical assessment? Sir, the key is establishing clear criteria for when tactical innovation is appropriate and ensuring that innovation occurs within institutional frameworks rather than outside them. Operation Night Symphony succeeded because it coordinated multiple units toward common objectives. The problem wasn't the tactical innovation, it was the lack of institutional mechanisms to authorize and coordinate that innovation rapidly. Colonel Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. The Major's point has merit. Current doctrine assumes that tactical innovation happens during planning phases rather than execution phases. But modern warfare increasingly requires real-time adaptation to enemy actions that weren't anticipated during initial planning. Furthermore, Natalie continued, encouraged by Mitchell's support, the coordination required for complex operations like Night Symphony demonstrates that individual initiative must be channeled through institutional cooperation. The success came from professional relationships and technical competence, not from rejecting military discipline. Hayes stood and moved to the digital display, showing Operation Night Symphony's tactical timeline. Major Petersen, your operation saved 500 American lives through tactical innovation that challenged conventional wisdom. It also created precedents that could either strengthen military effectiveness or undermine command authority, depending on how those precedents are institutionalized. Yes, ma'am. Effective immediately. You're being assigned to the Strategic Innovation Division with responsibility for developing tactical adaptation protocols that balance field initiative with command coordination. Your first assignment is creating institutional frameworks that prevent future commanders from facing the choice between unauthorized action and tactical failure. Natalie felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with recognition of the enormous responsibility being placed on her shoulders. Instead of court-martial for unauthorized operations, she was being tasked with reshaping military doctrine to incorporate the lessons of her tactical innovation. Ma'am, I understand the assignment. But what about Captain Stevens and his Rangers, who are still deployed in hostile territory? Hayes smiled for the first time during the briefing. Captain Stevens and his team were extracted 18 hours ago through a follow-on operation that incorporated several tactical innovations derived from Night Symphony success. They're currently debriefing at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. And Major Torres? Major Torres has been recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for her performance during Night Symphony. Her aircraft has been fully repaired and returned to operational status. As the briefing concluded and senior officers filed out, to address the strategic implications of tactical innovation in modern warfare, Natalie realized that Operation Night Symphony had achieved something beyond its immediate tactical objectives. It had forced institutional adaptation that might prevent future commanders from facing impossible choices between military discipline and operational necessity. 3 days earlier, she had been a major whose career hung in the balance because she'd chosen to save 500 lives through unauthorized action. Now she was a strategic planning officer whose insights would influence how the American military balanced innovation against institutional stability in an era where tactical adaptation often determined strategic success. The mathematics of military effectiveness, she realized, extended far beyond battlefield calculations to include the complex equations of institutional change, professional development, and strategic adaptation that determined whether tactical lessons translated into strategic advantage. Sometimes changing the system required proving that the system needed to change. And sometimes that proof came at personal risks that seemed enormous until measured against the lives that depended on getting the answer right. Major Natalie Petersen, strategic planning officer and tactical innovator, was about to discover whether institutional change was as mathematically precise as battlefield coordination. The answer would determine whether Operation Night Symphony's legacy was a single, successful mission or the beginning of fundamental transformation in how American military forces adapted to modern warfare. For someone who had spent her career calculating probabilities and optimizing tactical solutions, that seemed like exactly the right kind of problem to solve. The Command and General Staff College auditorium fell silent as Colonel Natalie Petersen stepped to the podium, facing an audience of 250 of the Army's most promising field-grade officers. 6 months after Operation Night Symphony, she had been promoted twice and tasked with something unprecedented in military history, teaching unauthorized tactical innovation as official doctrine. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same institution that had initially questioned her decision to bypass command authority was now asking her to train the next generation of military leaders in the art of calculated insubordination. But the modern battlefield had evolved faster than military bureaucracy, and recent conflicts had proven that tactical rigidity could be more dangerous than tactical innovation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Natalie began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from having her theories validated under the most extreme circumstances possible. "Today we're going to discuss something that challenges everything you've been taught about military discipline, when disobeying orders becomes a professional obligation." The audience stirred uncomfortably. Military culture was built on the foundation of following orders without question, and suggesting that disobedience could be professional duty struck at the core of institutional identity. But Natalie had learned that comfortable assumptions often produced uncomfortable results when tested against battlefield reality. 6 months ago, 500 American soldiers were trapped in hostile territory because conventional wisdom insisted that unconventional solutions were too risky to attempt. Today, those soldiers are alive because someone decided that following orders was more dangerous than breaking them. She activated the digital display behind her, showing the tactical situation that had confronted Operation Night Symphony. But instead of focusing on the technical details of artillery coordination and helicopter extractions, this presentation emphasized the decision-making frameworks that had enabled tactical innovation under pressure. The question we're here to address isn't whether military discipline matters. It absolutely does. The question is how we maintain effective command structures while enabling tactical adaptation that can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, one of the officers who had originally opposed her Syria plan, raised his hand. His presence in the audience reflected the Army's commitment to learning from its mistakes, even when those lessons came from subordinates who had proven their superiors wrong. "Colonel Petersen, you're describing a fundamental contradiction. Either we follow orders and maintain military discipline, or we encourage individual initiative that could undermine command authority. How do we reconcile those competing requirements? Natalie had anticipated the question because it represented the central challenge of modern military leadership. The reconciliation comes through understanding that military discipline serves tactical effectiveness, not institutional comfort. When rigid adherence to established procedures threatens tactical effectiveness, discipline requires adapting those procedures rather than accepting failure. She pulled up case studies from recent conflicts where conventional approaches had failed specifically because enemy forces had adapted to American tactical patterns. Modern adversaries study our doctrine as carefully as we do. They design their strategies specifically to exploit our predictable responses to tactical situations. If we become too predictable, we become ineffective. But how do we distinguish between necessary tactical adaptation and dangerous freelancing? Asked Major Rebecca Chun, a logistics officer whose supply chain innovations had quietly revolutionized military operations in 3 different theaters. Every officer thinks their situation is unique enough to justify breaking established procedures. That's exactly the right question, Natalie replied, moving to the core of her new training program. The answer lies in establishing clear criteria for when tactical innovation is authorized and creating institutional mechanisms that support innovative approaches rather than forcing them outside official channels. She displayed the innovation authorization matrix that had become the centerpiece of the Army's new tactical adaptation doctrine. The matrix evaluated 5 critical factors: time sensitivity of the tactical situation, adequacy of conventional responses, quality of supporting intelligence, coordination requirements with adjacent units, and potential consequences of both. Action and inaction. When tactical situations meet specific criteria on this matrix, field commanders are not only authorized, but expected to implement innovative approaches. The key is ensuring that innovation happens within institutional frameworks rather than outside them. Captain David Rodriguez, recently returned from command of an artillery battery in Eastern Europe, looked skeptical. "Colonel, this matrix is useful for academic analysis, but battlefield decisions happen in seconds or minutes. How do we apply complex evaluation criteria when enemy fire is incoming and people are dying?" Natalie smiled, recognizing the voice of practical experience challenging theoretical frameworks. Captain Rodriguez raises the essential point that separates academic planning from battlefield leadership. Complex evaluation matrices are useful for training decision-making processes, but tactical innovation ultimately depends on professional judgment developed through experience and education. She switched to video footage from Operation Night Symphony, showing the real-time coordination between multiple units operating under combat conditions. Notice that tactical innovation didn't happen in isolation. It required coordination between Rangers, aviation units, artillery, and infantry elements. The innovation succeeded because it leveraged existing professional relationships and technical competence. Furthermore, she continued, tactical innovation succeeded because it was based on thorough intelligence analysis and mathematical modeling of battlefield variables. Innovation without analysis is just improvisation, and improvisation without coordination is chaos. Major Sarah Williams, an intelligence officer whose analytical work had influenced strategic planning in 4 different operational theaters, raised her hand. "Colonel, you're describing tactical innovation as if it's primarily a technical problem. But isn't it really a leadership problem? How do we develop leaders who can make innovative decisions under pressure while maintaining the trust and confidence of their subordinates?" The question highlighted the human dimension of tactical innovation that technical frameworks often overlooked. Natalie realized that teaching unauthorized tactical innovation required addressing not just decision-making processes, but the character development that enabled effective leadership under impossible circumstances. Major Williams identifies the crucial point that technical competence must be supported by moral courage and professional integrity. Tactical innovation requires leaders who are willing to accept personal responsibility for decisions that could save lives or cost careers. She displayed photographs from Operation Night Symphony's aftermath. Lieutenant Colonel Murphy, receiving the Silver Star for his Ranger coordination. Major Torres being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel after her helicopter innovations captain. Stevens returning to his family after successful extraction. But she also included a photograph that few people had seen, herself standing in General Thompson's office, accepting responsibility for an operation that could have ended her military career. Leadership development for tactical innovation requires creating institutional cultures that reward calculated risks, rather than punishing failures that result from reasonable decisions made under combat pressure. We have to distinguish between failures that result from poor judgment and failures that result from circumstances beyond human control. Colonel Michael Harrison, the senior officer overseeing the new tactical innovation curriculum, stood to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what Colonel Petersen is describing represents a fundamental shift in how we approach military leadership development. We're moving from a model based on following established procedures to a model based on adapting procedures to achieve mission objectives. He moved to the podium beside Natalie. This doesn't mean abandoning military discipline. It means expanding our understanding of what professional discipline requires in modern warfare. Sometimes professional discipline means following orders exactly as given. Sometimes it means adapting orders to circumstances that weren't anticipated when those orders were issued. And sometimes, Harrison continued, looking directly at Natalie, professional discipline means accepting responsibility for decisions that challenge institutional authority, because those decisions serve larger institutional objectives. As the formal presentation concluded and officers began discussing the implications of tactical innovation doctrine, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought her from unauthorized operations in Syrian mountains to authorized instruction. In Kansas classrooms, Operation Night Symphony had saved 500 lives through tactical innovation that challenged conventional wisdom. But its larger legacy was institutional change that recognized tactical adaptation as a professional requirement rather than an institutional threat. The Army was learning to encourage the kind of innovative thinking that could prevent future commanders from facing impossible choices between military discipline and operational necessity. A year earlier, Major Natalie Petersen had been a strategic planning officer whose career advancement was limited by her willingness to challenge established doctrine. Now Colonel Natalie Petersen was shaping doctrine that would influence American military operations for the next generation. The mathematics of military effectiveness, she had learned, extended beyond battlefield calculations to include the complex equations of institutional change, professional development, and strategic adaptation. Teaching unauthorized tactical innovation as official doctrine represented the ultimate proof that sometimes the best way to serve institutional interests was to challenge institutional assumptions. As officers filed out of the auditorium to return to commands that would test their understanding of tactical innovation under real-world conditions, Natalie realized that her greatest victory wasn't saving 500 soldiers in Syria. It was changing institutional culture to ensure that future commanders would have the authorization and support necessary to make innovative decisions without risking their careers. The Night Symphony had ended, but its music would continue playing wherever American military leaders faced the choice between conventional failure and unconventional success. And that music would remind them that sometimes the most disciplined response to an impossible situation was refusing to accept that the situation was truly impossible. Mathematics, leadership, and moral courage had proven to be the essential elements of tactical innovation. Now it was time to see whether the next generation of military leaders could apply those elements effectively enough to protect American lives in conflicts that hadn't yet been imagined. for Colonel Natalie Petersen, teacher of unauthorized tactical. Innovation and architect of institutional change. That seemed like exactly the right kind of legacy to leave. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.